Welcome to Foundational Truth, truth you can build your life on with your hosts Jay Clark and Andy Bowles. We appreciate you listening again, and that's what I'm talking about.
Good to have you back.
I like this song.
It's good.
That's a good
Christ
song.
alone. We're going to end with that, by the way, how Christ is the hope for every marriage in our country, and every person in our country. So we're picking back up, though, again on the marriage we talked about in our last show. It's kind of hard to talk about it in a short time. It means so much to both of us who are married. Both of us have 4 children. I grew up in a dysfunctional home. My sister says we put the fun in the dysfunction. My mother's been married 5 times, and that was tough on me growing up. And so we're going to talk a little about how to reform marriage. Maybe we're not going to give definitive answers. We don't really know everything that has to be done in order to. We're going to give the ultimate way that that's going to happen, but in terms of law, we want to talk about a little bit about the legal ramifications of the homosexual marriage, and there are a lot of them. And picking back up on, I ended last time with the slippery slope arguments that if you let 2 men, then you've got to open the gate for a lot of other things. And people will say, no, that's not what we're saying, but it's going to happen. It's just going to happen because you're losing your boundaries.
Well, that's where we've come to now.
Yes.
Because there's been compromise down that slippery slope. And to this point, because the argument was, well, we mean this, and it's never going to get to this point.
Right.
But whenever you begin to compromise a little here and a little there, it's going to eventually go to where it's Pandora's box.
Right.
You're going to find yourself into multiple problems.
No-fault divorce, who would have thought? I would guarantee you there is a social connection to no-fault divorce and the coming of homosexual marriage.
I've never understood no-fault divorce. It's got to be somebody's fault.
No,
and
Andy,
90% of the time, it's both people's fault.
They just fell out of love. Right, yeah.
Fell out of love.
Right.
Okay.
So that goes back to the no-fault divorce allowed that we began to define marriage based only that we say we love one another.
Sure.
If we just say it, then that should be the reason for divorce. But obviously, there's serious problems with that. There's a lot of legal ramifications to homosexual marriage, and again, it opened the slippery slope argument to many other people. But this is why we do believe that the government has a vested interest in how marriage is defined. Both the federal government, though there is more of an overarching in order to keep all the states along the same lines, at least. But the state probably even more because they're the one that enforce and decide who is married. And so the state has a very deep vested interest in who is married because obviously now you're going to open up a whole new base for who is, how people are taxed according to whether they're married or not, what kind of tax credits that they get, what kind of tax credits they get for childbearing and those kind of things. So that opens up a whole new population. Like we said before, if 2 men simply decide, though they're friends or not, they don't have to be homosexual, they could decide they want to be married to receive the tax benefits, then now you're talking about the cost of government going way up. And the taxes on the whole general population also going up. Yeah. But we don't have time to trace that whole economic trail.
Oh yeah, big government. That's
big
one
government
thing that's been talked about in politics for the past several years since Obama has become president. Is the whole issue of the big government? The Republicans wanting to fight the big government.
Right.
Anytime you expand government, it's going to be a tax burden on the people.
It absolutely is. Then you got insurance issues now because insurance businesses are going to be required to give marital insurance to, like we said, homosexual. But it's not, like we said, it's not going to stop there. And so now you're going to increase the cost of running a business. And that means that wages, everything's going to go up. The price of the product that they're producing is going to go up. The wages for the people are going to have to go. Everything's going to go up. So that's going to be a problem as well. So insurance, social services is going to go up, having to monitor and deal with the different family situations. The benefits for child rearing, like we were talking about, that has to do with social service as well as taxation. Health insurance, we talked about that. And then dealing with the general health of the population, having to deal more with gender confusion. one of the number one reasons that homosexuals talk about how they whether they understand it as a choice, and when we say choice, I don't mean somebody wakes up and says, I'm a homosexual, but when they begin to trace back, when they begin to have these feelings, possibly at a young age, a lot of it I have found from my counseling as well as what the studies have found that there's a lot of gender confusion because of the absence of in a guy a strong masculine presence.
Figure. Yeah.
And then in a lesbian relationship, a lot of it has to do with the absence of a male or the abuse of a male, those kind of things. But that's only going to go up when you have children growing up, and not only that, it's going to become indoctrinated into the education system, because if it's legal, then now no one can talk about it in a public arena. Oh man, I mean, it's just a huge headache to think about the limiting of free speech that it's going to require, that no one then can talk about if they disagree with it or not. And then we're going to talk about whether churches are allowed to do that as well, and who they can decide who can marry or not. If they disagree with the state, what's going to happen then? Is the state going to sue, or somebody's going to be allowed to sue?
Well, let me ask you a question. Whenever you perform a wedding ceremony, do you fill out a small card and send it to the
state?
Circuit clerk.
Circuit clerk, you're right.
And of course, it's transferred to the state. Of
That's
course,
right.
you have a bottom portion of the marriage license that you fill out.
Right.
And I mean, what you're doing is you're putting your seal of approval on this marriage, and you're saying this marriage in a religious ceremony was conducted under my hand. And now, but if the government sees fit to force pastors to marry homosexuals,
right?
Then you're going to have
Yeah.
tremendous revolt.
What do you do if a homosexual couple comes to a pastor and he says, I believe that's wrong, it's sinful? Then they can sue him, and the government will be behind him, behind the gay couple because of that. Well, that's serious infringement upon free speech and a separation of church and state.
Yeah.
I mean, you may say, "Oh, that's ridiculous. You're doomsdaying, prophesying." And well, who would have said 40 years ago that homosexual marriage would be on the docket?
This is what we're looking at.
Nobody would have said that.
Yeah, this is it.
So there's a lot of legal ramifications, but we believe the government's gone the wrong way. We said there's a serious problem with marriage, and the government said, so why don't we open it to everybody? But we're saying, no, we need reform. How would you begin to approach that, Andy?
Well, first thing you've got to do is address the situation with divorce. As we were talking earlier, one of the arguments from the homosexual groups is that those who are heterosexual has not respected marriage. Therefore, why should we have any say-so? And what we should?
Yeah.
And one of the reasons is because we've made marriage an easy thing to get out of.
Right.
Divorce is so easy to apply for.
I would say we both would confess that they're right.
Sure, they're right.
They're right.
Yes,
that it's been cheapened. Marriage has been cheapened. That it's not been something that is sacrosanct. That's holy. That's holy matrimony, as we used to say.
Going back to the scripture, Hebrews chapter 13, verse 4, marriage is honorable in all. I mean, it's a holy thing.
Right.
Marriage is supposed to be holy and sacred. And I think what we've done in our day is we have become so selfish to where when we don't get what we want, we find a way out of it. We quit. We quit so easily. And so marriage has just been caught up in that very same thing. If I'm not getting what I want out of this thing, then, man, I'm out of this. I'm done.
Right.
And so,
Trampled upon.
And so lawyers have just made it real simple for us to get like we mentioned earlier, no fault divorces. I mean, it's not your fault, it's not my fault. We just not getting along.
We just did an easy way out of this.
Easy way out of this. No harm, no foul. We'll split it down the middle. You take this, I take this. All that kind of stuff. And even the issue with prenuptial agreements and stuff like that. There needs to be a definite reformation as far as the divorce system, divorce courts, all the legal ramifications with that. I believe personally that divorce should be an extremely, extremely hard thing to accomplish.
Yeah, should be rare.
And I'm not talking about just financially. I'm talking about to where I've heard in cases where in other states you can get, instead of a marriage license, you can have a marriage contract, covenant agreement. Covenant agreement. And in that, there's waiting periods for divorcement. There's counseling sessions that you have to go to.
Right.
And of course, there's and that's not all the answers to
right.
it, but what we're dealing with is a heart issue. I mean, when you get down to it, it's a heart issue.
Yeah.
You got to address the heart of man. But we definitely need reformation as far as divorce is concerned. We need to make sure that men and women are more responsible with the issue of marriage.
Right.
We need to make sure that those who have children out of wedlock, those who are living with one another, there should be some sort of an accountability system.
Very serious accountability.
Yeah,
right.
yeah. To where there's penalties whenever you do things the wrong way. I mean, you think about it. We enjoy sports. We're sports culture. When you're watching a football game and a lineman jumps before the snap comes, there's a penalty and they mark off 5 yards.
Right.
We love that in a football game. It entertains us, but we don't want it to be a part of our life.
Yeah.
We don't want any penalties. Well, there has to be penalties. There's always a consequence for our actions.
Right.
And so this needs to be some responsibility brought to men who are deadbeats,
right,
who won't get a job, who won't support their children, who won't love the person that's given birth to their children and commit themselves in a relationship, a marriage relationship, a covenant relationship with them. And so men, godly men, need to kind of hold them accountable. But also, I think it needs to be something that can be done from the government side,
Right. So we would say that the government needs to undergird traditional marriage by repealing no-fault divorce, making it more difficult,
absolutely.
Making a huge responsibility placed upon anyone who has children outside of marriage.
And right now it's a tax credit whenever you have a child outside of marriage.
Yeah.
And it shouldn't be that way. It should be the other. It should be a penalty against, because more times than not, it's going to cost taxpaying dollars for the child out of wedlock as opposed to a child in wedlock.
Right, because the government should, if the government is about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, then it has to help restrain the people, the evil of the people, the sinful hearts of people, to destroy their lives by, for example, heterosexual men who go around impregnating women all the time and then not taking responsibility for it, and then leaving those families in loss and confusion and so forth and so forth. Our answer, though, our ultimate answer is not any of these things. It's not legal. It's not social. We believe that the true answer is the gospel of Jesus Christ, and that we need God to rend the heavens and come down and change our hearts, our sinful hearts, and turn back to God, turn back to Christ, to repent from our sin and turn back to the Lord. Without that, we don't believe any of this can benefit society. So we just want to be honest about that. That doesn't mean we shouldn't keep influencing the government, and every American has a right to do that. We believe that. But we see ultimately it stands in turning the nation back to Christ. So we thank you for being with us today. We'll see you next time.